welcome you to Right Time, Right Place, Right People, Healthcare in Action. So before we get started, just a few disclaimers. This information is no substitute for any legal advice, and we have no monetary interest and are not being paid by any entity for this presentation. So this presentation has a few very simple goals. We really just want to ignite a spark that leads to open, productive, and positive changes in student health care. We want to identify and understand major areas of vulnerability and take the appropriate action to protect students from harm, and then know how to work with athletic trainers and other stakeholders to improve health and safety for our students. As a parent, there are a few things that you'll always remember about your children. The day they were born, when they took their first steps, when they said their first curse word, and reached any other major life milestones. For some parents in North Carolina, though, there's another day that they will always remember, the day they heard these words.
Hi, Ms. Portal. This is Katie Romano, the athletic trainer at Atkins High School. We need you to come to campus. There's been an emergency.
Or these words.
Mike, I need an ambulance now. Eric, I need you to get Tice's parents.
Mr. and Mrs. Oldenburg, I need you to come down to the field with me. Ms. Gaddy's working on Tice right now, but he's going to need to go to the hospital.
Hearing those words is heart-stopping for any parent, but depending on who is caring for your child in those moments can dictate how this story ends. Since the 2001 school year, at least 58 families have heard these words. Thankfully, 31 students had full recoveries with no lasting deficits. As you can see, these emergencies are not isolated to a single sport or a single cause. We have 8 students that survived, but had some degree of disability. Again, not single sport related or single cause. Yet sadly, 19 students died across various sports for various causes. And since the 2017 school year, there have been 2 deaths when the athletic trainer was not present. Now we understand that these statistics are difficult ones to process, and they leave us all with so many questions, but allow us to shed some light on 2 stories.
To JV coach Dylan Collier, the game of soccer is about more than winning.
It's all about building a family, building a team, and truly just building their character as a high school student.
What happened March 2nd, 2021 proves that. On this practice, the first in about a month, the team was warming up on the baseball field, including 17-year-old Pablo Horda.
Coach showed us around 2 laps around the field. And first lap, I felt perfectly fine, and halfway through the second lap, very moderate pace, I got really tired, and I had to start walking. And then I got really lightheaded as soon as I started walking, and I had to put my hands on my knees.
And somebody told me, Coach, you have a player now.
That player was Pablo, and he wasn't breathing.
Young athletes has become very real for an entire community in Orange County. Thank you for joining us. I'm Deborah Morgan.
And I'm David Crabtree. A 14-year-old from Orange High School is now in a medically induced coma because of the injuries received during the junior varsity football game. And crews rushed a varsity player off the field on a stretcher the next night. WRAL Sloan Heffernan is live at Duke with the latest on both teenagers. Sloan.
That varsity player is home and doing well tonight. Unfortunately, the same cannot be said for that JV player. He right now is in the pediatric intensive care unit with a serious brain injury.
Tice Oldenburg is the type of kid who makes a parent proud.
He is the sweetest kid, straight A student, incredible athlete. Whatever sport he touches, he does phenomenally.
So it was no surprise when Oldenburg made his high school football team as a freshman this year.
So who are these people taking care of our student athletes? So Before we continue, we're going to make one distinction and one clarification between the two. In North Carolina, we have two options for who provides care at the high school level. We have the athletic trainer, or we have a first responder. Now understand that the term first responder is not being used in the normal context, firefighters, EMTs, paramedics, but rather used to describe anyone who is certified in CPR and is willing to take a 10-hour training course. This could be your high school chemistry teacher, it could be a school secretary, or an overly involved parent. How is this possible, you may ask? Within the North Carolina athletic training licensure law, there is a specific exemption that allows secondary schools to hire first responders rather than athletic trainers, and allows first responders to act in the same capacity. Because first responders are permitted to perform the duties of an athletic trainer at the secondary school, they are expected to provide the same level of care. But is it the same?
And so today, we help to itemize the components of qualified medical care and how athletic trainers are positioned, educated, and prepared to provide this type of care. Athletic training is recognized by the American Medical Association, Health Resources Services Administration, and the Department of Health and Human Services as an allied healthcare profession. The athletic first responder is not. We've all heard the illustration of building your house on a rock versus sand. And that ultimately comes down to the strength of your house being based on the foundation. A rock providing a solid one and a sand not so much. And the same is true for athletic trainers and first responders. Built during 4 years of undergraduate studies, followed by 2 years in a Master's of Athletic Training program, is an education that lays a solid foundation to which building blocks of skills and practiced and honed through clinical experiences, supervised by seasoned athletic trainers. This education is capped off by a national certification exam and acquiring a state license to practice. And throughout this presentation, we're going to talk about first responders. Again, we're not talking about your firemen, your EMTs, and paramedics, or nurses. We're referring to those individuals that may, but generally do not have a background in sports medicine and have only completed the North Carolina High School Athletic Association required courses that include CPR AED, first aid, a concussion crash course, and 10 hours of continuing education annually. High school first responders can be anyone, from the school secretary to the history teacher to an assistant coach. But despite first responders having a lower educational requirement and no requirement for national certification, they are permitted to function on their own and potentially perform skills for which they have no training, which can endanger the athletes under their care. They also lack physician oversight that ensures care provided matches education and training. Athletic trainers have physician oversight, which dramatically reduces risk for the individual, administrators, the school, and the school district. The athletic trainer serves as the medical authority in lieu of a physician. The athletic trainer acts as an agent of the physician by following a standard operating procedure established in collaboration with the physician regarding basic care practices. There's obviously a vast difference in the knowledge and education of an athletic trainer and a first responder. But does it make a difference in the care provided to students across North Carolina? That's the question that Dr. Susan Edkins wanted to answer when she began her research 3 years ago. For her dissertation, Dr. Edkins compared the medical care offered between athletic trainers and first responders from all 8 regions and all 4 classifications of the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. She did so by using the Program Assessment for Safety in Sports, or PASS, which is comprised of 12 standards and 74 elements, and it outlines a framework for a comprehensive and strategic approach in the provision of athletic health care. The statistics you will see throughout this presentation comparing athletic trainers and first responders come from this research. When discussing athletic health care, we often talk about coverage versus care. Covering is often being present for a game, practice, or a conditioning session, and providing water and first aid at sports events. And in the case of the first responder, this is often what they're doing. But for the athletic trainer at events, we do much more than cover those events. We're actually providing care, just in a different venue besides the athletic training facility. An athletic trainer's education and scope of practice allows us to begin caring for our patients right from the sidelines through return to play decisions, stoppage of play, weather monitoring, and is the first step in the unparalleled continuum of care that an athletic trainer can provide. But what does continuum of care mean? It means that athletic trainers are equipped to follow their patients through time and adapt to their ever-changing needs. Athletic trainers provide a comprehensive range of healthcare services, spanning from preventative care, examination, assessment and diagnosis, immediate and emergency care, and rehab and reconditioning. Athletic trainers are also integrate best practices in policy development and implementation, documentation, and basic business practices to promote optimal patient care. The athletic trainers' coordinated efforts with others in the medical field, such as physicians, EMS, and physical therapists, equates to better outcomes for our patients. And neither years of experience nor years of continuing education credits impact the first responders' perceived knowledge. They say that they lack the basic knowledge to care for some of the most common injuries that lead to catastrophic results, including head and cervical spine injuries, cardiac conditions, and heat illness. First responders recognize the area of skills they are lacking to provide appropriate care. And in their own words, having a limited knowledge base hurts, and sometimes I wonder if the way it's set up isn't a liability. I don't think that the first responders that serve in our district are adequately prepared to handle a catastrophic injury. The reason I became the first responder is because somebody quit and they had no other options. Our first responder actually told me the other day that he won't be doing this again next year because it's too stressful for him to do something that he does not have a grasp on based on not having a medical background. So what does athletic trainer access look like across the U.S. and in North Carolina? Across the U.S., 66% of high school athletes have access to an athletic trainer, and 36% have access to a full-time athletic trainer. It's important to note that there's a vast difference between access and full-time access. Access means that at some point the athlete may have an interaction with an athletic trainer, whereas full-time access is defined as at least 30 hours per week, 5 days a week, and 10 months out of the year. If the athletic trainer is not available on a full-time basis, such as only providing care for football or only on campus part-time, the patient would not have the ability to engage in healthcare services. In North Carolina, we have over 200,000 high school student athletes participating in school-sponsored sports. Of those 200,000 athletes, 73% of them have some level of access to an athletic trainer, and 50% of our students have access to a full-time athletic trainer. But let's look at this in a different light. The North Carolina Department of Commerce annually ranks the state's 100 counties based on economic well-being and assigns them each a tier designation. The tier system is incorporated into various state programs to encourage economic activity in the less prosperous areas of the state. The 40 most distressed counties are designated as Tier 1, the next 40 as Tier 2, and the 20 least distressed as Tier 3. For our Tier 1 schools, again, that are our most economically disadvantaged, 47% of our high schools have access or have no access to an athletic trainer. For our Tier 2, 17% of our schools have no access to an athletic trainer. And for Tier 3, our most economically advantaged counties, 7% of schools did not have access to an athletic trainer. But for our schools that did, we can again see a vast difference between our 40 Tier 1 counties, with 53% of our schools having at least some access. Our Tier 2 had 83% of our schools having access to an athletic trainer. And for our Tier 3, 93% of students have access to an athletic trainer. When looking at access to athletic trainers within this lens, it becomes very apparent that our students in more economically disadvantaged Tier 1 counties have less access to athletic trainers. These also happen to be the schools, or these happen to be our more rural counties, where access to medicine is already limited. Having an athletic trainer in these schools would give our students access to medical care daily. Not only could this help save time and money for parents that have to drive great distances to access medical care, when it may or may not be needed, or it could be managed by the athletic trainer in school. But it will also improve health care by having someone to advocate for the child when advanced medical care is needed that otherwise care may have been delayed because of limited resources.
Now that we've covered the differences in education, knowledge base, and care capabilities, and where we are situated in the state at various schools, let's look at how these differences impact real-time response to emergency situations. So first we're going to talk about emergency action plans. Emergency action plans are a comprehensive document that is specific to an athletic venue and integrated with local EMS. Emergency action plans are written documents that are vital to the appropriate care and transport of athlete, coach, or spectator within a given athletic venue. Venue-specific EAPs are the first step in being proactive in planning and preparing for an emergency situation. These venue-specific EAPs allow for less chaos due to established roles of all available personnel, enhanced communication with EMS, and location of all emergency equipment like an AED. And yet, only 84.3% of North Carolina high school athletic trainers and 63.8% of North Carolina high school first responders report having emergency action plans. But having it's only step one. Step two is developing, reviewing, and rehearsing the EAP, and this is where we recognize that improvements can be made across the board. I used to work with a swim coach who would say, practice makes permanent. EAPs must be rehearsed with all athletic staff and pertinent medical personnel at least annually. This is very hard to do with limited access to an athletic trainer or to a first responder. In an emergency, you don't have time to look at the plan. You don't have time to stop and think. You need to react very quickly. Let's think about school fire drills. It's been a hot minute since I was in high school. I know it's but since we held a fire drill once a month, 10 months out of the year, for 4 years, I can still tell you exactly where I'm supposed to go stand if we have a fire drill and I'm in math class. If you hear the fire alarm in a school building, you instinctively know what to do because you have practiced it. It has become permanent, not just in your mind, but also in your body. Can the same be said if someone collapsed at your stadium? Speaking of emergency equipment, when reviewing and rehearsing the EAP, it's essential to make sure that coaches are aware of all AED locations, both in the school and at the athletic venues. This is important information to disclose to them because we know the earlier an AED can be applied, we increase survival of cardiac arrest by 90%. We also know on the flip side that for every minute of delay, we decrease survival by 10%. And we also know that survival of cardiac arrest is 30 to 50% if an AED is used within the first 5 minutes. And we also know that it takes, on average, 12 minutes for EMS to arrive to a cardiac event. So, as a way to improve the emergent care of cardiac emergencies, all NCHSAA member schools participate in a cardiac safety program. This program includes the following components: an appropriate number of AEDs on campus relative to athletic facilities, but there's no specific number or way to calculate an appropriate number. And also, it includes an AED maintenance program. This includes checking the batteries and the pads. But by participating in this, that means we're covered, right? We're covered, right? No, we know from Dr. Edkins' research that only 72% of athletic trainers and 65% of first responders have access to an AED within 1 minute of their athletic venues. So sports are back. It's COVID, sports are back. When the NCATA announced that sports could return in June of 2020 with a host of safety precautions, we at Atkins immediately met to begin planning our new normal. We had hired a slew of new coaches that were trained and certified in CPR and AED. I know that because I trained them. And then we made necessary changes to our practice locations, moving all of our teams on campus instead of their off-campus fields. And then meeting with each coaching staff individually to discuss their practice times, their practice locations, the EAP for their new practice venue. We reviewed the location of all 3 AEDs and which AED would be closest to their practice venue, and alerted them to my daily location and the message board that was outside the athletic training room, telling them where to find me if I was not in my designated spot. On the first day of practice, for each sport, I met with the teams. Since I was still fairly new to Atkins, I thought it best to introduce myself and tell each team my daily location in the event that they needed something. Because athletes always need something. And with so many sports going on at one time, both inside the building and outside the building, I, along with my athletic director, felt it best to stay centrally located in the athletic training room, especially since I had easy access to both of our gyms and my door opened right outside to the practice field and the baseball field. We also decided that I would use a golf cart to get to the stadium because it was about a half-mile away, or a 3-minute golf cart ride. And all the coaches were given my cell phone number and added to a group chat so that we could be in constant communication. All of this preparation was because we know that being proactive and creating and rehearsing emergency action plans is vital in emergency situations. And we know that survival rates increase by 35% when an EAP is used.
So looking back, planning for Tice's emergency began more than a year before that October night. Let's go back to the previous football season. At Orange High School, we've always had an ambulance on site for home JV and varsity football games. One night, I had an athlete from another school that did not have an athletic trainer get hit in the throat with a football. His throat began to swell and he was having difficulty breathing. I called for EMS to come on the field because he would need transported to the hospital. I informed EMS of the situation and that he may need airway management on the way to the hospital. Because the unit was a basic level unit, they would not be able to do an advanced airway if needed. They decided to call for a paramedic unit. We waited for what seemed like an eternity. All the while, the player was getting more and more panicked, making his breathing even more difficult. After the incident, I met with the director of Orange County EMS for an after-action meeting, and I discussed my concerns with her about having to wait for a paramedic unit and the delay in getting the athlete to the hospital. We agreed and decided that if a paramedic unit was needed during an emergency, I would work with EMS on the scene to get the athlete packaged and in the process of transport to the hospital as quickly as possible, and the paramedic unit would intercept en route. This would get the athlete to the hospital quicker and also get the paramedic to the athlete quicker. Fast forward to July. As usual, I met with my principal and athletic director and we reviewed the EAP and made any small changes we needed to our personnel and their roles. I then met with the new administrators and the head of our SROs to make sure that they understood what I expected of them in an emergency or any other law enforcement present at our games. For instance, when I have an officer present, they communicate with dispatch for me since they have a direct line of communication via radio. They are also then responsible for relaying information and helping direct emergency services, since they can communicate directly. I then meet with our coaches and make sure that they understand their roles and responsibilities. That month, I also attended the emergency in-service training with Duke Sports Medicine. This included our team physicians, at least a dozen school-based athletic trainers whose schools are affiliated with Duke Sports Med, and the outreach physical therapist and athletic trainer that Duke provides to each one of our schools. There, we practiced spine boarding, our emergency response, and what procedures we would use. All of this preparation and more would play a huge role later that football season. Part of planning for an emergency and preventing catastrophic injuries is monitoring environmental conditions, such as the heat, lightning, cold, among others. This ensures that our students are participating in a safe environment. One area that we'll focus on tonight is heat illness. Earlier tonight, we were able to read about one life saved under such circumstances. The North Carolina High School Athletic Association has a detailed heat illness management policy that includes both prevention and treatment. However, 26% of first responders indicated that they did not have or were unsure if they had a heat illness policy. This is unacceptable because research has shown that having proper policies in place, as well as the proper equipment and medical personnel, saves lives. There's a 100% survival rate if cold water immersion is used to treat heat illness, and a 55% decrease in heat illness when a heat acclimatization plan is used. We also know there's a 30 to 100% decrease in heat illnesses when we make modifications to activity in the heat. And the current North Carolina High School Athletic Association heat policy addresses all of these areas. Yet at least 26% of schools with first responders are not following it. But in order to provide the best care, we must have the policies in place and the necessary equipment. Here we can see that even when schools had the proper policies in place, not all of them have the equipment necessary to follow through with proper care. This is a major failure that will open the door for litigation. Using a rectal thermometer is the gold standard when determining an accurate core body temperature of someone suffering from heat stroke. And this is because once you begin exercising, extensive research has shown that all other means of assessing core body temperature become inaccurate. Furthermore, we must monitor exactly how much we have cooled an athlete, because cooling them too much can also cause further problems. Rectal thermometers are often a taboo subject because of the concern of modesty. However, we never question exposing a woman's chest when needing to use an AED, because everyone knows that it is required to render appropriate care. The same is true for rectal thermometers. It is a medical procedure essential in saving lives. Not using one to assess and care for heat stroke opens ourselves and our schools up to litigation and does not provide the best care for our patients.
So being in the right place at the right time when every second counts. The North Carolina Board of Education and the NCATA require us athletic trainers and first responders, to be physically present at these events: football practices, football games, football away games, and wrestling home matches. Because these are deemed to be the highest risk. It is assumed that because the inherent risk of football and wrestling are greater than any other sport, we need to concentrate our attention there. However, during the fall sports season, there can be up to 10 additional teams practicing or playing at any given time. Other sports matter too. While football and wrestling are deemed to be the sports with the highest risk, injuries and sudden death can happen in any sport at any time. By being present at these other events, athletic trainers are available to provide immediate care to any athlete regardless of sport or school. ATs take care of the students regardless of the color of their jersey or the name that's on the front of it. In fact, one of the lives saved in the last year was that of a visiting team cross-country runner. When her heart stopped, it was the athletic trainer from the home school that saved her life. The fact that athletic trainers are present to care for all athletes at any home events, regardless of sport or school, is reassuring not only to the athletic trainers when we send our kids on a bus to another school without us, but it is also reassuring to parents, coaches, the athletes, and the administrators that there will be someone there to care for their students should a situation arise. Athletic trainers are very rarely able to travel with our teams to away events because we are caring for the athletes that remain at home. So it is monumentally important that every school has an athletic trainer so that these students are safe and cared for no matter what event takes place. And just a note that we had one in Dr. Edkins' research that reported that they were the first responder, but they were also the head football coach. That's just a little bit of a conflict of interest and against the rules. So going back to Pablo's story, it was a normal Tuesday. March 2nd, 2021 was as normal a day as normal days go in athletics, which means it was crazy. And during a pandemic. So school lets out at 3:40. We had our usual athletes coming in for rehab, for taping, for stretching. We also had the normal hustle and bustle of practice set up as we got ready for football practice, soccer practice, and track practice, as well as getting ready for game day setup for boys and girls lacrosse. That was going to take place later that night. And then we had just had a new group of sports starting, which included softball, women's soccer, golf, and tennis. To say that the athletic training room was busy might be an understatement. So after nearly a month of rain, because it was a rainy February, it had finally stopped raining, the sun had come out, we had put our ark away in the shed and decided that we were going to play outside.
It's kind of, I acted at that point, it was all muscle memory from my training.
Collier started doing chest compressions. One of his players called 911, another got in touch with Pablo's mom, Laura, and the others ran to get athletic trainer Katie Hanes-Romano and HPU athletic training student Jonathan Fryer.
So I told Jonathan, I asked him, I said, "Are you good? I'm gonna go get the golf cart." And he was like a little panicked because it was so busy, but he's like, "Yeah, I'm fine." I said, "Okay." So the way our athletic training room was set up, there was a laundry room that you had to walk through to get to the field. As I am walking through the laundry room, I am met by two JV players who said, "Miss Katie, we need you. Come quick. We have a player that's down. He's not breathing." All I thought was, run. I have to get there. I turned to Jonathan, who was standing in the doorway with golf ball size eyes, and I said, "Grab the AED and my phone," and I took off. As I get to the field, head JV coach Dylan Collier was doing chest compressions. Pablo started to gag a little bit once I got there, as if he were choking, which is common when you are giving chest compressions. So we suspected that he may have vomited, so we rolled him to his side to sweep his mouth. Immediately he turned gray. I checked for a pulse at his carotid artery and found none. Jonathan had unpacked the AED and had placed it by my side. I turned the AED on and followed the instructions. I tore open the pads, placed them on Pablo's bare chest, and instructed everyone to back away. The AED analyzed his rhythm and advised a shock. The AED charged and delivered that shock, causing his limp body to jerk up off the ground, just like you see in the movies. After the shock was delivered, I continued with CPR compressions and 2 breaths. As I started my 30 seconds of compressions, my second set of 30 compressions, I heard the sweet, sweet sound of sirens. Never before in my life have I been so happy to hear sirens, ever. EMS was beside me before I knew it, and they were taking over care. As I told the paramedic what care had been provided, they said, "We've got a pulse. It's a weak one, but we've got it." 10 minutes later, Papa stood up and walked to the gurney.
On the way to the school, I got a call from one of the kids on the team who asked if I was on my way, and I could just tell by the way the kid was talking to me, something's not right, something is bad, like this doesn't sound like he has fallen, that no one could really explain what was wrong. They just said, something's wrong, we've got to come.
And then the next thing I remember is a guy, me on the floor, shirtless, with a medical kit around me and a guy to my right telling me that I scared them because my heart stopped.
They put the 12-lead EKG on him, had him speaking before they put him on the gurney. So it was a miraculous thing to watch from where we started to where we finished.
Arrived to the school, everyone was still gathered around Pablo, but he was awake and he was talking. He seemed kind of stunned, but he wasn't out of it, he was himself. And so when I got there, it was scary, but mostly it was just confusing because he was Pablo, and everyone was gathered around him. The ambulance was there, Katie Romano was there, his coach was there, everyone was gathered around him, and they said he had stopped breathing, and I just couldn't. He's never had any kind of health problems at all. I mean, nothing.
I work in education and I know we have all the systems, but then you think, oh, we'll never use that or whatever, but they had a great system and the system worked, so.
So concussions and traumatic brain injuries. Concussions are by far one of the most common injuries that athletic trainers work with, and it's also an area of expertise for athletic trainers. However, concussions are also the injury with the most legislation and lawsuits nationwide, but they're not the only head injury out there. In fact, our own concussion law stems from the tragic death of 5 North Carolina high school athletes in 1 year. We know that in at least one of these deaths, part of the law's namesake, Jaquan Waller, there was no athletic trainer at his school, only a first responder. He was allowed to play in Friday night's game after sustaining a concussion 2 days prior. The first responder to check on Jaquan after the initial hit and did not recommend that he or his mother seek further medical treatment. Without an evaluation or clearance by a qualified medical professional, he was allowed to play in what would be his last football game. That Friday night, the athletic trainer from the visiting team watched helplessly but provided the care that she could as Jaquan collapsed on the sideline after a second hit. Jaquan died of second impact syndrome, a condition that causes the brain to rapidly swell after sustaining at least 2 head injuries in a short time frame. Second impact syndrome is preventable, but typically non-survivable. That same year, 2008 and 2009, was also the school year that the Senate Bill 864 was proposed, that if passed, would have provided funding and required all public high schools to hire a full-time, non-teaching athletic trainer. But it died in committee and efforts were shifted toward the development of our current concussion law, which includes an education component, an emergency action plan requirement, rules for removing the athlete immediately from activity, and referral to an appropriate healthcare provider, which includes athletic trainers, and then a supervised gradual return to play progression. Just as we saw in Jaquan's case, we've seen in countless others. Concussed athletes at school with limited or no access to athletic trainers are less likely to be treated according to current evidence-based recommendations. And this can lead to permanent damage or death of the athlete. Lack of the appropriate care increases the likelihood of re-injury and long-term consequences. As you read in the stories around the room during cocktail hour, most of our stories start the same way. Everything was fine, and then it wasn't. These were Tice's last 3 plays, and my last views of him minutes before he collapsed. In these plays, he covers his appropriate coverage. He does what he's supposed to do. indication that anything is wrong. Again, he lines up, finds his man to cover, and does exactly what we expect a freshman JV football player to do. After this play, it was the end of the first quarter, and he walked the entire length of the field with his position coach, saying what he saw, what he didn't see, what the coverage looked like. Again, no indication that anything was wrong. And then on that last play, he slips on the grass, or so it appeared. I mean, after all, it was October and the dew had settled. He still made his tackle, but he never got back up. The total time between those plays was 4 to 5 minutes. If that film clip had continued, you would have seen me and my assistant athletic trainer, Brian, running onto the field as soon as the play was called dead. We were about 20 yards from where Tice collapsed. When we got to Tice, I asked my normal question, "Hey Tice, what's wrong?" After all, it just looked like he slipped on the dew, maybe broke his ankle. Tice was able to get out my head, "I just don't feel right all over." Those were the last words I would hear. Immediately I knelt at Tice's head and stabilized his head and neck, not yet knowing what exactly was wrong, but knowing I was dealing with a significant brain or spinal cord injury. I looked over my shoulder to my left, knowing that my athletic director would be in my eyesight. After all, that's what we had practiced and rehearsed. I only said 4 words to him: "I need the ambulance." And that triggered our emergency action plan. After that, I was able to fully focus on Tice. I didn't have to give any more instructions that did not pertain to his direct care. Brian began a neurological exam. Within seconds of stabilizing Tice's neck, without needing to ask, the 2 athletic trainers from Hillside were in my peripheral vision, filling the roles of the 3rd and 4th person needed to provide care. Why? Because it's what we had practiced. Both schools are part of Duke Sports Medicine's outreach program. All 10 schools in the program had participated and practiced our EAPs together just a couple of months before. And we knew exactly what was needed of each of us in this situation. Brian was on Tice's left, Gary on his right, and Tammy at my side at his head. No words were exchanged as his jersey was cut and his face mask removed. His shoulder pads and helmet were then carefully removed for transport to the hospital. Words weren't needed. We had trained for this. As Tice's brain began to shut down, he started to fight me, trying to rip my hands off his helmet. He then started posturing, his fists and arms curling into a ball, a sign that he did in fact have a severe brain injury. I knew that my athlete was dying, but we couldn't stop. Tice began to seize, aspirate, and vomit, and we had to clear his airway. None of the 4 athletic trainers on the field that night had ever been in this situation before, but we had trained hundreds of times for it. We were able to remain calm and provided the care needed, although we all knew the situation was grave. In what seemed like an eternity, but was really only 5 to 7 minutes after his collapse, Tice was loaded into the ambulance and transported to Duke Hospital. Then reality hit, and what I had been able to compartmentalize during Tice's care came rushing to the forefront of my mind. I crouched down behind a bench on our sideline, cried, vomited, then composed myself, because we had 3 more quarters of football to play, and I still had a team of athletes to look after.
We swooped in and took him straight to Duke, and quite frankly, probably the best place in the country he could be for head trauma.
His aunt, Caroline Oldenburg, says her nephew, an only child, underwent brain surgery and several other procedures for subsequent bleeding on the brain. She says his parents are leaning on their faith.
I mean, they're doing amazingly well, but really through the prayer of God. I mean, Jan has been reading the Bible to Tice nonstop.
Another Orange High School player was also rushed to Duke 1 day later at this varsity game. Marventi Beasley was treated and released. Oldenburg's family is hopeful that their player will also make a full recovery once he wakes up.
Nobody will take the recovery more serious than him and give 110% for it.
Oldenburg's aunt tells me that he has been stable since he had his brain surgery on Friday. She says they plan to keep him sedated for for at least the next few days to allow his brain some time to heal. So right now, it is wait and see until he wakes up. Back to you.
Thank you.
There's been an emergency. 4 words that make time stop. But how does it end? Having the right people in the right place at the right time determines the care that follows these words. That care can be the deciding factor if the story ends on the field or in that classroom. Or it can just become a chapter.
Pablo spent 7 days at Brenner Children's Hospital undergoing testing and monitoring with his parents at his side.
That next week was just doctor after doctor, nurse after nurse telling us, we don't know what happened, but man, you were so lucky to have the people around him that were there, because it could have had a very different outcome.
While they still don't know definitively what caused Pablo's heart to stop, they're grateful for the training, the AED, and the people who got it going again.
Great forward-thinking by central office, especially just with not just the AEDs, but for the athletic trainers. It's an investment, was needed, still needed, and I'm so thankful that they made that investment.
He could have had that event any number of places, but he happened to be at school where he was with people that are there to protect him, and they did. They have a system, and the system worked. His coach dropped down and immediately did CPR, and Katie was there and came running with the AED, and you know, they did exactly what they were trained to do, and because of that, Pablo is really,
You know, my team, they acted, they saw a teammate down, and they went to help. A couple of them went to go get Katie, a couple of them called 911. One player called Pablo's mom. So they all just instinctively knew what to do. We talk about team sports, you know, it was truly a whole team effort. It wasn't just one person. It was everyone working together to really get the job done and help take Pablo's life.
Some team athletes had it, the drill down pat to where they were able to get my pulse back within a minute, and I'm incredibly thankful for that.
Do you feel like this saved your life?
100%.
there was nothing we could have known about. There was no one who could have really predicted this. And so really, he had to have been in that exact place with those exact people around him for this to have turned out the way that it did. Having the athletic trainer there and having Atkins High School, you know, have this perfect plan in place, and it made it was literally a life-changing difference.
Hang out with his friends, talking, it's the best thing you could ask for, you know, to see him coming into your classroom and into the door every day.
Oh, I've never been so happy to see somebody upright. It's fantastic to see him walking, living his best life. I mean, that's what we're here for. That's why we do what we do.
I always thought the athletic trainer was the person that always kept you from winning the game. But after the incident, obviously I found out, and I understand now how important they really are. And the reason I'm speaking to you today is because she was there. I'm here today because a certified licensed athletic trainer was present and prepared, and that saved my life.
Tice has been in a drug-induced coma over at Duke University Hospital for weeks after his injury. He's had at least 4 brain surgeries. And we are happy to report this afternoon that the Orange County High School football player severely injured during a game this season is making some big improvements in his recovery. Tim Polio tweeted out a picture of 15-year-old Tice Oldenburg walking today after suffering a head injury 40 days ago.
Tice Oldenburg's family telling us he's now recovering and receiving physical therapy in Charlotte. They are hopeful the 15-year-old will be home by Christmas.
After several brain surgeries and weeks of rehab, Tice returned home just before Christmas, welcoming him inside were cards, letters, and posters from family, friends, and strangers wishing him well.
It all inspired me to get better and heal up and work out, get stronger, even when I'm hurt.
His routine now consists of physical and speech therapy, the road to recovery at times difficult for the 15-year-old. His memory is not what it used to be, especially when it comes to what happened.
For the year, talk about your journey since then. I've been through a lot, and so has my family. We've been through a lot this year, and this is my first year that I've actually struggled in my life. But yeah, I'm having a very, very great concern. Is there any goals that you have set in the future that you hope to achieve? Yes, sir. Just go back to school and hopefully manage for football, manage for my team, be there for my team, yes, sir. Well, I can tell you.
Tice Whitted Oldenburg.
And these are not the only two. And already this year, we've had the lives of 4 athletes saved by an athletic trainer. The right people were in the right place at the right time, and that saved lives. So what do we do now? How can we be proactive in making sure that our athletes are taken care of? What are some practical ways that you as stakeholders can impact their health and safety? Write and support legislation that promotes athlete safety is a great start. SB 864 can be reintroduced, ensuring that every public high school student in North Carolina has access to a full-time athletic trainer. This not only improves health care for our students and our athletes, but it will save lives. Define an appropriate number of AEDs in our schools, or provide designated funding for purchasing this life-saving equipment. Since the Gefeller-Waller Law was signed in 2011, the number of concussion-related deaths and disabilities has significantly decreased. It is safe to infer that this law has saved lives. We need this same type of legislation as it relates to the recognition and treatment of heat illness. This would include rectal thermometer use and access to appropriate equipment. HB 116 from the 2017-2018 session was similar to the Concussion Act, but it included heat stroke, sudden cardiac arrest, and concussion education and care. As with SB 864, it died on the committee floor, but it could be reintroduced. And we understand that change takes time. We know that. But should the first responder model continue, we must have improved guidelines for their knowledge base and skill set, as well as improved supervision by a licensed healthcare provider. And then the more you know, the more proactive you can be. After all, knowledge is power. And you start by learning your schools. Do the schools in your district have access to an athletic trainer versus a first responder? And what is the ratio of athlete to athletic trainer? On average, a 1A school is a ratio of 100 athletes to 1 athletic trainer. 2A is 200 to 1, 3A, 300 to 1, 4A, 400 to 1. You see where we're going. But these numbers can be significantly higher depending on the county and the school. This ratio can be upwards of 600 to 1 in some locations. And if you're curious to know what the ratio should be for the schools in your district, you can use the NATA staffing model to determine the AT needs used to provide the best care. And then ask, is the athletic trainer full-time versus part-time? Then who employs them? Is it a hospital? Is it a clinic or the school itself? What policies and procedures are in place? Do students have access to other healthcare providers, a school nurse, mental health counselors? Does the investment in athletic trainers outprice the risk associated with not having qualified healthcare personnel available for our students? And does your district have ATs for their middle schools? Then talk to your athletic trainers and your first responders. They know their school better than anyone else. They can communicate the needs of their athletes, any concerns that they have for their health care, and any areas of improvement, and whether or not policies are being followed, and if they're not, why. Then understanding that health care isn't just needed after school. In some counties, the school nurse are assigned to 5 or 6 schools in the county and may only spend a full day or a half day at any particular school. Who's on campus in the absence of a nurse? And who's available to monitor return to learn accommodations, any allergic reactions, or any diabetic care? Is there a strong relationship between the athletic trainer and the school nurse? Emily and I both have fantastic relationships with our school nurses because of COVID. But that's not necessarily the case in other counties. And then we welcome any questions, but before we open the floor, we do want to take a moment to introduce some additional panelists that you can ask questions to. Athletic trainers and fellow lifesavers Eric Hall and Kelly Miller. You guys can come up after my name. Athletic Director Leslie Longstutz, and then most importantly, Pablo and Alex Portal.
They're actually doing this talk here for you today. They've done it for the school board. They're going to do it for the athletic directors here in the state, and they're also going to do it for school administrators. And it is really, really hard to relive the probably most traumatic day of their lives all the time, but they do it for us. They do it to make sure that we understand and we know and we can teach and learn about what it is like to be in the situation of an athletic trainer during a catastrophic injury. But I think the wonderful part about it is we're trained for it. This is what we were trained to do, and I think that they are just a wonderful example. So if you guys can just join me in a round of applause. So we have a wonderful panel here of lifesavers, survivors, administrators, just to kind of talk about what their role was in their specific situations. I always kid around that Eric Hall and Emily Gaddy are competing for Lifesaver of the Century because they both saved multiple student athlete lives. And so we are just so grateful for them here at the North Carolina Athletic Trainers Association. So what I'm going to do is have Eric introduce himself and just a really brief synopsis of why you are up for Lifesaver of the Century. You can pass it along if each person would just introduce yourself details of where you work, and then kind of a short snippet about your situation, and then we'll open it up for questions, and then if you guys don't have questions, I will ask them.
So I am Eric Hall, I'm athletic trainer at Cary High School. Y'all have done a great job. I'm glad things have worked out for all the survivors and the athletic trainers having a plan and implementing it and doing it right. I've been involved with a few life-saving events. Which one do you want me to talk about? Do you want
Just
to
list them real quick.
I had I have 2 cardiac events. One was a spectator, and one was an athlete. A 15-year-old who had a stroke after football practice, and then a heat illness emergency when we had to do rectal temperature and cool him down. I almost was arrested that day for doing the proper treatment. So that's the quick version of it.
Yeah, we can go through and then we'll talk a little bit about that.
My name is Kelly Miller. At the moment, for my situation, I was at TW Andrews High School out in High Point. And for my situation, I was in a school-based model where I'm a teacher throughout the day and then I provide athletic training services after school. And the day that this happened, the school nurse was not on campus, so I had to step in as the medical professional that day and help prevent a kid from bleeding out because he cut his leg while doing it. But because of other support in my situation with the athletic director, coaches, activation of the AP, we were able to prevent that kid from bleeding out, possibly. But he is alive today, and he's doing just fine.
Great, thank you.
I'm Leslie Longstuds. I'm athletic director at Atkins High School. My role, along with Katie, was reviewing our EAP and then making sure that the coaches, practiced over and over. We practiced several times, and then implementing it. Pablo decided. So it scares a little bit. Fun fact, Pablo was my student as well, so he was much quieter in class. So.
I'm Paulo Wertol. I suppose I am a survivor. Despite my stature, I am no physical specimen, and I definitely was not ready to die for the sport. So I am incredibly thankful to the athletic trainers.
And hello everyone, my name is Alex Wertol, and I am the father of Pablo, and thanks to an athletic trainer, I'm the happiest father in the world, so thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Does anyone have any questions for any of our panelists? Nancy has the microphone, and if you do have questions as we go around, just raise your hand and Nancy will bring the microphone over to you. Well, you guys have all had outstanding stories, and obviously all of them include athletic trainers that follow policies and procedures. Eric, can you talk to us a little bit about your situation and how it became a little bit difficult in terms of following the correct policies and procedures?
So around my event happened in, one of the events. The heat illness happened around 2012, and before that, we had many symposiums of how to do ice immersion for any victim who's overheated, to do rectal temperature, to cool them down first, to transport second. And we had many symposiums and talks about it. And there's always a question, well, what do we do when EMS shows up? And nobody could answer. So I guess I got to deal with it, and cooling the athlete down, his mental status decline. It wasn't a perfect ice immersion because I used a trash bag and we were in a shower with the ice. And EMS showed up, the fire department did some sort of vitals and said, "You're doing a great job." It's like, well, good, good. I feel good about myself. And EMS shows up, and I'm thinking, well, we've got about 9 minutes. I need to go at least 15. Unfortunately, the thermometer was in Celsius, so make sure you change it to Fahrenheit, okay, because that was a little difficult. EMS shows up. They said, well, let's put them in the truck. We have IVs in there. And I yelled at them to bring it in, and nothing happened, they didn't do it. And you could tell they were getting very discouraged when they asked, well, let's move them, and I said, no, we're going to finish the time. And we did finish the time, and, you know, he had a good body shiver of, you know, he's ready to get out. We could tell his temperature dropped. So we removed him. And then the same fireman said something about, I should have, you know, relinquished and let EMS take over. And we're both there to help assist the athlete. And it doesn't matter who takes credit. Let's just do this work together. And then the police showed up. Wanted my name for the report, and I was like, well, what's your name? I'm going to put it in my report. You know, and they can, I did find out later, you know, the police can remove you if you're impeding the EMS or somebody who's treating somebody. That if you're in the way, they can remove you. But I'm assisting and I'm doing the treatment, so, you know, I wasn't doing anything wrong. So that was nothing. I didn't get arrested, so that was good. Since then, you know, we try to get in touch with EMS over all of Wake County to let them know what happened, and so they could kind of inform EMS in our area. And I never spoke to this position over all of EMS, but eventually it got to them, and the policy was changed for Wake County, and I just, Jim Bazluki told me, he's also an athletic trainer, past president, that the policy was changed for all of North Carolina to let athletic trainers do the rectal temp and let them treat, and once they're done, then EMS can take over. And so I'm glad it finally changed that way. Unfortunately, I went through the raw end of dealing with it, but it turned out well. So, any questions?
No, we appreciate that, and I think most of the athletic trainers do know that heat stroke is 100% survivable if we're able to drop the body temperature within the first 30 minutes. And so with transport, if it takes 20 minutes to get to the hospital, we've lost valuable time, and there can be, you know, some irreparable damages to organs. So we appreciate you for, you know, fighting for your patients' health and well-being. So Kelly, so tell us a little bit about, oh, sorry, was there a question? Absolutely.
It's hard to see the lights.
Sure. Thank you, first of all, wonderful event. My name is Dwayne Foster. I serve as the District Athletic Director at Orange County Schools. Been here a short time in Orange County. I want to brag a little bit because our own Emily Gaddy's on stage and getting it done. So certainly excited about that. But I'm just staying on the lines of the heat illness component, right? And when you are in spaces and remote spaces where, you know, you mentioned, you know, do your middle schools have athletic trainers, right? And what's beneficial as it relates to having cold tubs, you know, on site, and how that works when you don't have a full-time trainer there to be able to coordinate that or work that, or the training that coaches can receive in an instance where there's a heat illness issue for anybody, you know, to address. But I kind of want to touch on that a little bit from that standpoint. Thank you.
I'll start it. So the High School Association has guidelines for recognizing and what to do in emergency for heat illness. The Coaches Clinic in July in Greensboro, they typically, it's usually a talk or review for heat illness and other medical emergencies that coaches can attend as well. As having it's beneficial to have some way of cooling them down. You know, I let our coaches know as well, you know, if I am not on site or en route to be on site, to, you know, move to a shower, cool them down, use ice bags to cool them down, wet towels and ice to kind of lay over the athlete until I'm there. Anything we can do to cool the athlete down before transport would be beneficial.
There was a study several years ago out of Indiana University, I believe, don't quote me on that, but they did a tepid water immersion test to see if they got the same cooling results as using cold water, because some of us are places where a hose might be all that we have. And their conclusion was that you can cool using tepid water, provided the water is moving, and you have to keep them in for 30 minutes. So that's another alternative. I know I don't have a whirlpool down at my field house. I just have like a soaking tub. So anytime I have to submerge someone, they get a partner, and the partner gets to walk back and forth to make the water move, so that we're pulling heat off of them with the moving water.
And then I would just say, in terms of, for our schools, our middle schools that don't have athletic trainers on campus, having the proper equipment there is still just as important. Our emergency services don't travel with that equipment, and our hospitals don't have that equipment either. And so if we have that equipment on site, it's able to be used, but again, it's only going to be as good as the policies and the training that we have in place. Otherwise, it just becomes a very expensive thing to rinse out jerseys and coolers and things like that.
Thank you so much for that, and I just want to touch on as well, from the cool tub standpoint, right? Again, that's an inexpensive thing, but it's extremely important and can use appropriately. But if I'm bringing it out every day, and I'm glad you mentioned about, so I can just fill it with water. I don't necessarily have to have ice, right? I can just start practice on a 90-degree day, have water in it. Is that beneficial? I mean, what are we talking about here from that standpoint?
Put a tent over it.
Put a tent. Here we go. All right, so now we'll get some more. Okay, perfect.
Boiling water's not going to.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
But if it, like I have a similar thing where, because I don't have a cold tub, I pull the tub, it lives leaned up against the building during the hot summer days. I put it flat on the ground. I start it when I start prepping for practice, because it takes it a while to fill up. And then I take one of my collapsible tents, I create shade, and then that is what I have to work with.
Yeah, thank you, Kathy. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and there's other techniques as well. I think the taco method is a really quick way of using a tarp, putting the patient in the middle of the tarp, rectal thermometer, and then pouring ice and water over them, and then holding the edges of it so that they are submerged in that if you don't have one readily available, particularly like if it's like cross country or on an off-site facility where you don't necessarily have that. But I think the biggest issue is having a plan. Actually talking to coaches and saying, if this happens, what are you going to do? If you don't have a cold tub, how are you going to manage that? You do have a cold tub, but we don't have water next to it. How are we going to manage it? If we don't have ice, how are we going to manage it? And having those conversations before you actually have the incident occurs. Awesome. Any other questions? Yeah. And this is for anyone on the panel, it doesn't just have to be you.
Hi, my name is Mike Isa. I am an athletic trainer as well, and very proud to be. So this was a fantastic presentation and very well done. My question is, we have clear limitations. I think we're trying to get legislation passed here, and we'd all like to see athletic trainers at every high school in North Carolina. What do we see the barriers to this being, and how do we address those barriers with state legislators? What should we be saying and pointing out to them to address those barriers?
I might hand that over to the lovely lady in pink in front of you. Ashley Long is our governmental affairs co-chair, and she has been working tirelessly to help legislators understand the value of athletic trainers, why we need them, and how we can make sure that A, there's no legislation that goes in that keeps us from doing the things that we need to do, but also positive legislation to help promote safety for our student athletes. So what can we do, Ashley?
We have until 10, right?
We're going for 8:15. I want people to go to bed. It's Friday. Good night,
I think the legislation that y'all described is, that would be ideal. And of course be, instant, and we would see those athletic trainers spread across the state quickly. But it's a challenge because it would be a funded mandate, which is always hard to get past. And depending on the economic climate and, you know, politics, it's hard. So there's other ways that we try to improve access to care and access to athletic trainers. And I also love the presentation, and you guys saw the maps of the disparity between the Tier 1 and the Tier 3 counties. And I think there's a lot to that when it comes to healthcare access, not just in athletic training, but across the board. And so engaging healthcare systems like they have been, you know, our model as our profession has evolved has gone away from a school-based, coach-based type of model into a healthcare model. And so now a majority of our athletic trainers are employed by healthcare systems and are integrated into those systems. And when you have a competitive healthcare market, that really helps you get athletic trainers into schools. And when you don't, you have to find other ways. And, you know, related to that is us being able to get reimbursed for what we do. And, you know, not just showing our value through a salary, but, you know, we do a lot of skills that other providers are reimbursed for. We're trained to do those skills just like they are, and we work in settings in which they're getting reimbursed. And so that's one avenue that we try to go down to try to get treated fairly in that arena. That would help because it's easier to hire somebody when you can bill for their services. And it would, not that we'd be billing in the high school, but it's all related. Other things are protecting our ability to practice at the highest level of our scope. So we practice under a license just like other healthcare providers, and sometimes that license gets challenged, and so we have to defend it. And then, you know, there's, just like in any business model, there's economics of healthcare. And so people want more parts of the market, and, you know, we, on the ground, we work really well together, but sometimes things in policy get placed where it's a disadvantage for us. And so we're a small profession. There's 1,900 athletic trainers in North Carolina. We're misunderstood. Our name stinks, and nobody understands what we do. So there's an uphill battle, but I think our good relationship with physicians can help us. I think more and more these news stories like we saw about Pablo, that's good publicity so that people know that we are. And then the rates of athletic trainers at schools are so much higher now than they were when we came through school. So every kid at Orange County High School knows what an athletic trainer is, or Atkins High School. We live in rural eastern North Carolina, so parents don't know the difference. Because there's nobody there to tell them the difference or to show them. So I think it's like everything, it's multifactorial, but I think legislatively protecting our license, making sure legislators know things like this, see these types of presentations, gaining reimbursement and fair and equal access to patients is important. And so we work on all those fronts.
So also, because Emily and I have taken our show on the road, it is also a grassroots effort to inform school boards and school administrators. Athletic directors oftentimes know exactly what we do. School board members don't. And that was one of the things that was very evident when we presented to the school board. We're having school board members coming up afterwards going, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Or, you were at Atkins? You're in my school? Like, they had no idea that the hospital provided an athletic trainer to all of the schools. So some of it is grassroots on our part, trying to hit the people that can help us make noise, going, we need this.
So I'm Jocelyn Wilson. I'm one of our orthopedic surgeons at Duke. I work with Mike Issa and can attest to the benefits of doing our training that we do with our outreach schools and really rehearsing for when these things are necessary. So thank you for participating on those rehearsals and taking them to heart, no pun intended. But so I have also known first responders who are, doing these things out of, a sense of responsibility. Like their schools seem to not have the budget or whatever. They don't have an ATC. Obviously, it'd be preferable to have the ATC. That would be so much better for the school district. But then you've got these first responders who are meeting some requirements, whatever they are. But is there any parallel effort, like as a, for schools, say, that aren't able to provide ATCs to enhance or broaden the education required or provided to the first responders? To, like, in reality, like, how do you, our schools are something like, we don't have that in our budget, or we can't do it. How do you bridge the gap where you'd rather have an ATC there, but that might not happen? How do you make it better?
We have a wonderful representative from the North Carolina High School Athletics Association.
Thank you, Nina. My name is Ken. I work with the North Carolina High School Athletic Association. And so, Mike, I'm gonna take a stab at your question, and just to let everyone know that this past Tuesday, there was a memorandum of understanding signed between the North Carolina High School Athletic Association and the state school board. And so basically what has happened right before our very eyes, actually over the last year, is that because of some legislation that came down the pipe, that this memorandum of understanding was necessary. And so now the State Board of Education is actually the go-to in terms of who do you talk to, who do you reach out to, the members of the State Board of Education. I would say this to you in all fairness, that it needs to be done in a very professional way, not an accusatory way, in an encouraging way. And the reason is because not only do these people, the State Board of Education, address the issue of athletic trainers in secondary schools and public secondary schools, but they also oversee first responders. And so it's the State Board of Education that would set the standard of education for first responders. It's the State Board of Education that would be able to move forward this notion, this positive notion of athletic trainers in all of our schools. And so what I'm telling you is that the game has changed, and it changed on Tuesday of this week. Thankfully, the State Board of Education has given the North Carolina High School Athletic Association the nod to be the overseer of interscholastic athletics in this state for the next 4 years. We're optimistic that will be renewed every 4 years, but the game has changed. So the message that I want to clearly communicate is reach out to members of the North Carolina Board of Education. Those are the people that their phones need to ring, their emails need to receive messages, because from them, then they will in turn reach out to the legislators, that if legislation is needed, that can take place. But the State Board of Education is the group that can change the game.
I think that's really valuable information, and the Board of Education also gets information from the Department of Health and Human Services, and so really one of the things that we're charged with as the North Carolina Athletic Trainers Association is making connections and reaching out to individuals, because first and foremost, almost every single person is either a parent, grandparent, auntie, uncle, somebody in their family plays sports, and they want to make sure that those students are safe in everything that they do. We also want to make sure that they're educated in the differences between us. And so that's why these lovely women have been knocking on every single door, trying to make sure that everybody understands, so that as we're having these conversations, things are happening. We have amazing examples. I mean, I can't tell you how wonderful Pablo and his family has been. They have been at the School Board Association conference, you know, with us. They are here today. It's not a short journey with gas prices these days for them to come out and support us, but for people to understand these real stories and the real impact that athletic trainers have, I think that's when we're going to push the needle, because at the end of the day, everybody wants the same thing. Every organization wants the same thing, and that's safety for the students of North Carolina. I know we don't have a ton of time, it's like 8:07, but because of their long trip across the state, I just wanted to get just a little bit of insight from Pablo's dad, who hasn't had an opportunity to talk. I know your wife has been the one on a lot of the TV shows, and of course Pablo, and sharing what does this mean to you, and as a parent, what do you think you can do, or what can parents do in order to push the envelope and the needle in this situation?
So I think in reality, in my view, the most important factor is awareness. The moment that the parents and families are aware of the situation and aware of the need of athletic trainers, the push for a change in policy for athletic trainers to be present in every sport event will be obvious. In that scenario, I do understand now, but I understand thanks to this, event with a happy ending. But are other parents aware? And is there any way that we can make them aware of this thing? Needless to say that, as you have mentioned, we all want the safety of our students and our kids. But I don't think, I do think that we need to do an extra step to make sure that all parents are aware of the need of athletic trainers. When we talk to other parents, sometimes they don't even know, like, okay, so who is this? What do they do? Why are they there? And I think that the story that we can share, and that's why we think that this is our moral commitment. It is not only our appreciation for the work we do, but it's a moral commitment to the rest of the community, is to come to these places and spread the news of what you all are doing. So I'm terribly thankful, but I'm also thinking this is an opportunity to spread the news that there is something that needs to be done, and we're here to help.
And we so appreciate your time.
No, thank you so much. It's our pleasure. We'll drive anywhere. We'll walk if we have to.
We may have to. It goes up to $5. We'll look at bicycles. Pablo, do you have anything to share with us as we're wrapping up?
Well, to touch on that, I would say that nothing will get people more involved than knowing that something like this could affect them. And like my mom said many times, we never thought that anything could ever happen to something like that could happen to me, because I've always been relatively healthy. And the sooner people realize that it's random, it can happen to anybody, then I think the sooner people will be more involved. And also, like my mom said, we didn't really know who the athletic director was, what their job was. So when people realize that this is an issue that affects everybody, then I think that level of awareness will definitely spread to a higher degree. And on a personal level, I have to agree with my dad. I'm incredibly thankful. This is a rare occurrence, but I'm incredibly thankful to Katie and Coach Long. But I do think that I'm in a position where if people see that someone who's relatively normal like me is now a year later on the forefront, not on the forefront, but going to all these events and sharing my story, then I think it makes it a lot more relatable. So that's my main goal in doing all these things.
Yeah, let me add something else to it. I would like to I saw a couple of slides before with different percentages between first responders and athletic trainers. And it is important to understand the data and the evidence behind it, but I think that whenever we translate those percentages into the life and safety of the students, that impacts what you see as a father or as a mother. And to me, in reality, I didn't see those numbers. I see lives, and that's when you you start worrying, what are we doing in order to make sure that those kids are safe? And we have to do whatever we have in place to do it. And it's true there are economic components that we have to consider, but those economic components may quickly disappear as soon as parents understand the importance of having an athletic trainer in our sport events.
100%. And so you can just pass it over to Leslie over here. So from an athletic director or somebody who's in a position to, really make change in terms of what happens at your school and your athletic department, what are some things that are important to you, and how do we, once again, push the needle towards other athletic directors getting more athletic trainers? Because you guys clearly have a wonderful model that was set up for something like this, and not all athletic directors have that.
Right, so we always start our seasons out with a big coaches meeting. And we're pretty clear, we were very clear on what the expectations were. And our campus is situated extremely spread out, so fortunately for us, we have 3 AEDs, one that stays with the athletic trainer, and then one at the office and one at the stadium. I'm not exactly sure, looking back, Katie and I've talked a lot over this past year about all this. I'm not sure what would have happened if Katie would have been there. I mean, I know Dylan did what he was supposed to do, but I feel like we're educated on a, we just kind of put not a literal band-aid, but we kind of get the ball rolling, and then AT's like sweep in and essentially save the day. And I really honestly don't know. I'm so thankful that she was where she was and not at the stadium, because we did go back on our debrief and we parked where she would have been if she would have been at coverage 20 minutes later. And we drove the golf cart all the way up, parked it, and I said, "Are you really going to run that?" And she said, "Yeah." So her and Jonathan took off, and it was literally 3 minutes. But the point is if Katie wasn't there, like our middle schools don't have an athletic trainer. My athletic trainer now got a phone call last year. Someone who was playing on our campus in middle school hurt their arm or their leg, and she went down there just last week. One of our PE students passed out on the track. They called Nicole, and she went down there. So if we don't have these people on campus during the day or in the evening with the appropriate EAPs, and they have to communicate with their athletic directors and athletic trainers. If your athletic director is not listening to them, go knock down their door. They need to listen to you. We have had this conversation how many times? I mean, you've got to get in somebody's ear. They need to listen to you because you're the professional. You know what needs to be done in these situations. But Katie and I went over it time and time again and rehearsed. But that you've got to be, from our standpoint, you're the most valuable person that I have on my campus. I feel like I just kind of, write some schedules out and I don't really do Band-Aids either. Like if something's wrong, go see them. No, I don't. But really though, if your athletic trainer or your athletic director or administrator are not listening to you, just keep climbing. Central office, if they don't listen, just keep going. Because you're very, very important. And I don't know, I don't know what we would have done with that. I mean, I don't, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
And this goes to her, to the three of them. Some of our grassroots efforts are making changes. Because of the school board meeting, Leslie was also there. 2 of the school board members from Forsyth County stayed after to talk to us, to talk to Leslie, to talk to Pablo and his mom. And I feel like we can take full credit for it. I'm going to. Tonight we're going to. But they purchased 95 AEDs for the school system. That's a win in our books. So it's working, slow. It's working.
And then last but not least, of course, Kelly. Leslie talked a little bit about how the athletic trainer sometimes gets pulled to middle schools. You obviously got pulled out of your classroom to go assist. What is the role of athletic trainers at our school base that are there all during the day, and how does that help the entire student body?
So I hate to foreshadow, but this week in the and one of the topics was controlling bleeding. And one of the days I was teaching the class about it, we were practicing, and then I hear over the walkie, hey, we need 911 to the gym. And on that day, the school nurse wasn't there, so I acted, and I told the class, I said, hey, I'll be back. Unfortunately, they were unsupervised for a minute, but I took off out the classroom. I ran down to the gym, and when I got to the gym commons area, I noticed that there was a window was broken. But before I say all this, guys, we know how some students can be, and we know how high schoolers sometimes let emotions get the best of them. But in all situations when we are providing health care, it is not always to an athlete. We provide health care to a lot of different people. Your situation, somebody in the stands. My situation was just a student. But when I walked into the gym commons area, I noticed the window was broken, and I just noticed a trail of blood going down into the gym, which was also the same path to get to the athletic training room. When I got in there, the athletic director was kind of helping support the child while he was on the treatment table, and he had, I called him the other day, he said he used a belt as a tourniquet, and he just had it on the table. And the other steps to prevent bleeding is apply pressure, elevate. There's a lot of other measures, but preventing the child from going into shock, trying to support them and be like, hey, we are here, reassure them, just to make sure that they're comfortable. But while I was going down there, the first thing I saw was just a kid on the table, a lot of blood. I grabbed some gloves on PPE, of course, and a Gatorade towel, and I started applying pressure. And we grabbed an incline board, shoved it up under his leg, elevated it, just to try to control the bleeding as much as possible. And EMS has already been called, they were on the way, so we were there for about not even 10 minutes while we were doing all of our life-saving measures to prevent bleeding. And when they got there, I applied pressure the whole time. We got him on the gurney, got him out to the ambulance, and then they took over applying pressure. They actually used a tourniquet, a legit tourniquet, before we even took him to the ambulance. And the next day, just out of curiosity, I went to the principal. I said, hey, how's he doing? Have you heard anything? And he said his grandma called him, or he called grandma, and said that if it wasn't for the measures that we took or what we did to control the bleeding, that he could have possibly bled out because of the laceration that he had on his leg. So I've been messaging him through Facebook and everything, kind of checking on him about every other month just to see how he's been doing. Because as an athletic trainer, once you have that relationship with an athlete, you always have that relationship with them. And I think that's a big thing from our standpoint, because we don't just see them in the classroom, we see them on the athletic field. And out of all the people at the school system, or throughout the school, we probably have one of the better relationships with the students, which is awesome. But he, like I said earlier, he's doing great now. He had about 55 stitches in his leg, and it was huge.
I'm glad to share the picture.
Yes, I have a good picture. But Emily, Katie, thank you all for allowing me to present this story. This is, because it wasn't with athletics, I really haven't had the chance to share it as much, but it is still a life-saving story.
No, it definitely is, and we all know moral artery, you can bleed out in less than 10 minutes. And so your actions were very important that day, but also when we looked at stress areas and health, access to healthcare, sometimes it's 45 minutes to get to a level 1 trauma hospital. Sometimes you have to meta-flight to get the treatment that you need. And so who's there in that moment to stabilize the patient, to get them to those situations? And that's what's really important. And so when we think about athletic trainers, a lot of times it's just on the football field, and clearly Pablo was not on the football field. And it's just that kind of view of athletic training, but it can be in the classroom, it can be in the gymnasium with an incident, it can be anything. And even as simple as some of these distressed areas, these kids are not getting physicals, or they don't have healthcare access except for the athletic trainer who's doing their blood pressure. How are we preventing, diabetes and long-term injuries and promoting wellness and all of those things? And so I just really, from the bottom of my heart, as the president of the Athletic Trainers Association, you guys are fantastic, you're amazing, you support us so well, you are obviously heroes, And you guys too, because you're a survivor, but right now you're a hero to me because you guys are making it happen. You're talking to people about your stories, you're sharing what's going on, and that is what's going to move that needle, and that's what's going to make people understand that this isn't just ice, tape, stretching, and those kind of things, but this is really life-saving stuff. And I can't thank every single person, because I know it's a Friday night, you probably have way better things to do than, hang out here and listen to research and topics and stuff, but the fact that you took the step to learn and to understand and to talk to other people and to really, hopefully fight for us when you're out there is really special and really important to us. So I just want to conclude. I know I went a little over, but thank you guys for all that you've done. Thank you for being here. Thank you guys for being panelists. Thank you for being my road show.
I'm going to say our email address is up there. If you enjoyed the presentation, tell your friends. Emily and I are available for parties and events.
We do have this recorded, and so what I guess one of the questions is what do we do now is we share this information. We get it out there. We have a YouTube channel. We're going to be posting a lot of our talks, a lot of things out there. If you have friends, legislators, PTAs, I always say I'm a men's lacrosse athletic trainer. Nothing is more effective than a lax mom. And I will stand by that 100%. So if you have those parents that are very vocal, very involved, share the video with them. Let them know what's going on. Share, our Facebook page. Share our Instagram, because we're going to really be promoting a lot of the things that we've done. This is National Athletic Training Month. We're really excited about it. March is when we celebrate athletic trainers, celebrate all the things that they've done, celebrate the lives that have been saved because of them. And so thank you for being here and celebrating with us today. Have a wonderful evening, drive safely. And you can take pictures. If you have any questions, we'll be here to talk, but I do want to get you guys home at some point. We can talk about this all night.